Hello, Father Alexander Lucie-Smith. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me, Jenny.
I'm delighted to see you again. We tried this a couple of years ago, and my internet was so terrible we gave up, and it's taken us 2 years to reschedule. Yeah, 2 years to reschedule.
God.
But yes, so just for my audience, Father Alexander is the parish priest of St. Clement's in Ewell, Surrey, and a prolific author of a series of crime novels based in Sicily around the mafia. And he also has a Substack called, I was going to say my own name, my own Substack name, The Chemist of Catania. And that is how, no, sorry, I came across your work because I was listening to the Spectator Holy Smoke podcast sometime in 2023. And you had done a very interesting interview on there about the Latin Mass, which at the time I had just kind of come upon and was very intrigued by, and I continue to be very intrigued by. And I contacted you, and we sort of struck up a correspondence, and we follow each other on Substack. We share each other's work. And yeah, I love Chemist of Catania. It's very gripping, and I love all things Italian. But I think part of my interest going back a few years now over the Latin Mass has been, I write in Saving Culture from Itself, kind of does what it says on the tin. I look at the madness of our contemporary culture, and for whatever reason, I have a fondness or sort of a hearkening back to sort of the old times. And I'm not exactly a traditionalist, because I'm a very contemporary person, but I have a lot of admiration for and fascination with the past, and things like a Latin Mass being the traditional version um, uh, hold great like appeal to me, and it's clear why it would be making a resurgence among young people who are looking for refuge essentially from this woke madness, various derangement syndromes that we're living through. So you've been a priest for how long?
I've been a priest, I think, since 1996. So is that 28 years now, or 29 years? Or it's coming up for 30 years anyway. It seems like yesterday, but it's a hell of a long time, isn't it?
And where have you served?
Well, all over the place. I served in South Wales. I was in Italy for some years. I was in Africa for some years. And then I've been in various parts of Surrey and Sussex. So I've been all over the world essentially, as much all over the world as I want to be. And now I'm back where more or less where I was born, and that's where I'm going to stay.
Yeah, yeah. Do you see the same resurgence in terms of people, newcomers to the faith?
It's early days, but there is a bit of anecdotal evidence around that there is a resurgence. And the extraordinary thing is, everybody is saying that the resurgence is primarily among men and young men. The average Catholic mass goer used to be, shall we say, a lady in her 70s. Now that's changing. We expect ladies in their 70s to be coming to church, but now we're seeing youngsters and young men. And you talked about the Tridentine Mass. Now you see, it's 2025. The last Tridentine masses were said as I think December 1969. And that's when the Tridentine Mass was phased out. And when I was a little boy, nobody was talking about the Tridentine Mass. The idea was 1969, the Tridentine Mass was put to bed and it would never come out of bed. There would be no resurgence. It's very strange and very unexpected that by some people, that there is a resurgence, although it's not unexpected by me in the least.
Oh,
One of the things across the board, not just in religion, is that I can't remember who coined the phrase the persistence of memory. We're often influenced by things that happened hundreds, decades before we were born, even hundreds of years before we were born. And the Tridentine Mass, which I barely remember as a tiny, tiny boy, is even though the historical memory seems to have died off, it's the group memory, the community memory is there, and people are harking back to it. People are wanting something that we had in the past and which they still think is valuable. They're wanting something that anchors them in tradition, I think. All our current attitudes are anchored in tradition, whether we like it or not. All the things we discuss, essentially, you and me, what I'm sure we'll be discussing, the questions we're discussing all had their origin in the year 1968, probably, but maybe even their origin in the year 1789.
Yes.
It's there's that famous conversation, I think, between Chu En-lai and Henry Kissinger, in which Henry Kissinger said, "What do you think of the French Revolution?" And Chu En-lai said, "It's still too early to tell. We're living in the shadow of '68. We're living in the shadow of the storming of the Bastille, and we're living in the shadow of the Second Vatican Council. And these things haven't yet worked themselves out."
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. But what is it about the Tridentine Mass that holds this fascination? Because I think I agree. The idea, this persistence of memory, and this sort of collective, almost cellular connections that we have to ancestry, cultural ancestry, not just
Mm.
our own family ancestry. Um, but in the culture sector, in the culture, in the realm of culture, it would seem to me that only things of a particular nature will stand the test of time. So, what do you think is about the Tridentine Mass that does that?
Well, Tridentine Mass, TR, Tridentine, Tradition, Transcendental, and it's that third one, the transcendental part of it. The Novus Ordo can be celebrated in a transcendental way, but it tends not to be, largely because to celebrate it with beautiful music, you do need a choir and you do need the resources, which you only really get in large city parishes. But it's this transcendental approach. You can have a Tridentine Mass which has got no choir, no music, which is very transcendental because of the silence at the heart of the Tridentine Mass. In the modern Mass, in the Novus Ordo, the priest says it out loud. He says the Eucharistic prayer out loud. In the Tridentine Mass, he goes quiet after the Holy Holy, and then you just have the punctuation of the bells, and you have the elevation of the host and the elevation of the chalice, but you have this total, profound silence. There's a Northern Ireland writer, uh, she's not often identified as such, namely Dame Iris Murdoch, who talks about going to a convent. It's in her novel The Bell, and they go into the chapel, and nothing is happening in the chapel. The only thing that is present in the chapel is the annihilating silence, and I think you get in the Tridentine Mass an annihilating silence. It's not about you. It's you're looking into the abyss, or maybe not the abyss. The heavens are open and you're looking up through the parted clouds towards something that is the glory of God. You can't see the glory of God, but you know it's there, hidden just from your sight. And that's annihilating silence. The world is silent and it's a space for God. And I think that's very important.
Mm.
I think the the mass as we have it today in most parishes is a great opportunity for community cohesion and things like that. But the transcendental element quite often can be missed. You do
Yeah.
have moments of transcendence in the modern mass, I must say, in the contemporary mass. But that transcendence is so important.
Yeah, I have a lot of sort of stories about this actually, because even though my parents were atheists and sort of left wingers, I came from two large extended Catholic families, and I grew up partly in Ireland and partly in Italy. So, you know, I kind of just like absorbed it through osmosis to some degree. And my American grandfather in particular was very devout, very very devout. But I remember going in the '80s when we lived in New York, going to like family funerals and stuff in modernized Catholic churches. And I mean, I was already a secular kid. It was the 1980s, and it wasn't in the ether, but there was no beauty. There was no resonance there for me. But my father grew up in Belfast. My mother grew up in New York. My father grew up in Belfast, and in West Belfast, it was a mixed marriage. His grandparents were mixed, one Catholic, one Protestant. Most of the children of that marriage, that they were all Hollands, were brought up Protestant. And one then later, at age 21, one of the daughters converted to Catholicism. And she had worked her whole life since, from the age of about 12 all the way through till when she retired. She never married. She worked as a mill girl. So she had, a very grueling job. She had very humble life. Um, and she decided she wanted to convert in a very sectarian place,
Mm.
because she loved the smells and the bells, as
Yeah.
they say. And she did convert, and she was the only person in the family, because she was my father's aunt, but she really raised him. Um, she was the only person in the family that kept up with Catholicism. My father thoroughly rejected it. Her nieces, my father's sisters, kind of just let it fall by the wayside. Nobody kept it up. Not even her brother, who was born and raised Catholic, or her sister-in-law, my grandmother. It just kind of petered out. It wasn't an active practice for them, but it
Mm.
was for my Aunt Sissy. It always was, because she loved, and it was a place of refuge. And I don't know if you've ever been to Belfast, but whilst physically it's quite pretty, like there's mountain hills and mountains on view, and there's the loch and the very changeable weather, and there's some beauty, there's a certain beauty to it. But these areas, they're old industrial kind of slum areas, especially back then. And she worked in a factory, so there was not a lot of physical beauty in her life.
Mm.
And she was a very beautiful woman when she was young, but again, she never married. She stayed single to take care of her mother. Um, and this very circumscribed life, and it gave her great joy, and it gave like she had a very authentic faith, and she seemed like a very content, positive woman. Even though when I would go to see her when I was older and think, "Wow, this is a quote unquote limited life," you didn't really you didn't see that in her when she talked to you, because she was delighted to see you. She was always giving you a fiver. She was always sending you cards
Mhm.
saying that she was praying for you. I mean, she was just like
Mhm.
the sweetest, most delightful person. So I understand, like, through her story, through being told her story and having memories of her, I understand how important that is. um, just so important to the human spirit to have the thing about that I appreciate now, and I wouldn't have necessarily appreciated before, is that the unknowable part of God, I suppose. Like,
Mm.
and forgive me if I'm making a, a mess of this, because I don't really feel confident speaking about this topic, but there's a certain unfathomable power and beauty that is what I think calls to. I think we all are born with certain antenna toward that, which those antennae get rusted and dulled, or just snipped off entirely by life and society. But we still have that connection. And when you're in a beautiful environment with sense and sound and sight, all kind of producing glorious sensations, that connection suddenly starts to feel quite real. The other day I was driving around. I guess sometimes, because the evenings are longer now, I take my dogs out in the evening, and I take them for a pup cup at Starbucks, and I drive over, and I kind of wanted to drive around. It was a nice evening, and I ended up in this part of Belfast I'd never seen before, which is, I thought I'd been to every corner of this town, but I won't say the name of it. It's a housing estate, one of the early ones from like the 1950s, and one of the grimmest places I've ever seen, honestly. And it has a church. I should have showed you the picture. I should have sent it to you. I'll send it to you so you can see it. It's the ugliest building I've ever seen. I mean, it's just like a concrete bunker with one little like sort of rectangular window that kind of looks like thick gray glass. and it's brown, and it just says on on the side of it, St. Andrew's. I think it's Methodist, if I remember rightly. But I was like affronted. I was like personally affronted by the true hideousness of this building. And I thought, well, I don't want to offend anyone. I don't want to upset anyone, especially not that I have many listeners from this part of the neighborhood, but like I just, how can that be? How can you take this story of transcendence and squish it into such a hideous box?
Yeah, I mean the desire to make religion ugly, sadly, has been turbocharged by quite a lot of people within the Christian community, and it's not the way to go. There's always been a lot of bad taste in Catholicism, but
Mhm.
that's okay. We're Catholics; we do bad taste, and we're happy with that. But the things you've mentioned are joy, beauty, and personal witness. And those are the only three arguments for Catholicism or any other religion that will still work today: joy, beauty, and personal witness. And so the greatest advertisement for Catholicism in our time is clearly Mother Teresa. And of course, despite Christopher Hitchens' demented attack on her, she's still a byword for goodness. And of course, not just Mother Teresa, but there are other saints as well. And then, of course, the joy and the beauty of the buildings is very important, I think. One of
Yeah.
the sad things, though, is that when you go to countries like Portugal, I was just in Portugal, you go into beautiful, beautiful churches, and they've been reduced to museums. Um, the numinosity, the religiousness of the building has slightly been has bled out, I think, and that is a great pity. One of the we do need a more emphasis on beauty, but we also need a huge, great deal more emphasis on joy, I think, as well, because we've got to be cheerful people. We've got to, I don't know, just communicate that life is good despite all the drawbacks. Life is good because we believe in God, and we believe when God made us and put us on this earth, he was not making some catastrophic error. Quite the contrary.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, just as a contrast too to that sort of dour northern um, killjoy religious instinct. Last October, I was in Rome, and I with my husband, and we went to Santa Maria in Trastevere, and I went in, and I'm not a practice. I haven't converted. I'm not. Actually, technically, I was baptized in my granny's kitchen sink,
uh-huh.
just off the Andersonstown Road in Belfast. But I'm not baptized. I don't have religious education. But I've taken on this sort of small praying habit, and when I went into Santa Maria Trastevere, which I'd been into before, and I've been in, I lived in Rome for years, so it's like I've been into all the big ones. And as a kid, especially, like being dragged around when what I really want to do is eat pizza and sit in air conditioning. And I went and I prayed, and but I was looking around, and that it has this beautiful blue, like a really particular blue, the name of which escapes me, and the golden stars on its ceiling, and
Mosaic.
yes.
It's an apt mosaic, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is. And, Trastevere was always like a working class, sort of poor area. And I mean, just contrast that. I don't mean to sound glib, but just contrast Santa Maria Trastevere, which I can't remember the year it was built. Was it built in the 1500s or earlier? I don't even
Much
know.
earlier, much earlier. I think about the 600s,
Oh,
probably.
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I should know that. But so it would have seen like a millennia almost of poor wretches
Mm.
coming through its doors, and you think, okay, well, I'm glad I didn't live in the Middle Ages because I have indoor plumbing, and I have central heating, and I have antibiotics, and all, and I have rights. um, but you know what they had over us, though, was that those poor people could have access, could go in, just walk through those doors and see the sublime. And our modern version of that, it looks like an abattoir, and it's horrifying. It actually, I find it upsetting. And even for the better off people, especially like suburbia in America, their buildings, I don't know, I'm not an architectural enthusiast particularly, but I don't think you have to be one to realize that kind of these modern structures, um, don't dial you in the same way at all. And I think part of the thing that draws me to belief in general is because of the craziness around us. We're butchering children. We're, you know, allowing the NHS to go into the business of killing sad old people. I mean, these are horrors. These are actual
Yeah,
horrors.
yeah.
Um, that it makes me want to take refuge and sort of a sense of safety almost, or a sense of connection with the past, because what I see in front of me in contemporary society is too horrifying to believe.
There's a lot of ugliness around, and there's a lot of hard-heartedness around, and the modern ugliness dresses itself up as something good. This assisted killing or assisted dying or assisted suicide bill is a good example of that, in that we're told that this is compassionate. Uh, when you have a dog that cannot be cured, it is compassionate, I suppose, to take it along to the vet and have it put down. But with people, that is not the case. It is very, very worrying. I remember being in Belgium once, a country that has largely abandoned the Catholic faith, and how. And I was in Ypres, and it was in November. Oh, it was cold and grim and grey. And Ypres is in its centre quite pretty, but it's very depressing because it's the epicenter of the killing fields of the First World War. And there were all these people in the cathedral square with ruined faces, these alcoholics, And I thought to myself, my God, you better be careful, because somebody's going to come round with a van and take you away for assisted death. And Belgium is now the the euthanasia capital, along with Canada and Holland, of the world, which is really, really frightening and awful.
I laugh because I find it so gruesome that it just I don't mean it's funny, but it's
Mm.
does it
Oh,
ever
it's fun.
does it ever strike you as almost like a Monty Python sketch? Like
Yes.
that's what
It,
assisted suicide thing sounds like to me. I feel like John Cleese is going to come out and do a bit.
Well, it is a sort of a black comedy, because we're being told that death is good and killing yourself is compassionate, and this, that, and the other. It is, and the twisting of the language is it's very 1984ish as well. The Ministry of Truth and so on, and so I mean, everything is the opposite to what it means.
Right.
It's a hall of distorting mirrors. There's no doubt
Yes.
about that. What people need when they are terminally ill is TLC, tender loving care, which at the same is free and at the same time costs a lot, because
Yes.
people have to step up to the plate, and we're not prepared to look after people in that way. That's our real problem.
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, and um I don't judge that because would find it immensely difficult. Um it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult to care for someone who is beyond, or seems like beyond help or beyond
Yes.
hope. It takes a sort of fortitude that I don't know if I have. And I think but I've met many people in my life. I'm very lucky to have met quite a few people and been related to many, actually, who are extremely good at it. Um, it's a gift. It's a vocation. So I think one of the things that one of the many things that we've gotten wrong is we created this standardized, systematized world where we all can expect to get medical treatment, but when we and that's great. I've benefited from it many times. You scale that up, if because we didn't bake into this the spiritual aspect, you scale that up, nobody can deal with that level of human suffering
Mm.
and not become numb to it. And the NHS has become this like monster looming over us all, and now it's just at the point where, like, you know what we're going to do, we're just going to kill everyone.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
just horrifying.
we idolize the NHS. We
Yeah.
lost our religion, so we created a new religion, and the idol was the NHS. And this is unfortunately when the idol starts to not do what we hope it was doing, i.e., to collapse, and the system starts to collapse. This is what we take refuge in. The truth of the matter is that assisted dying may not pass this time. I hope it doesn't pass, but it'll keep on coming back. And the number one motivation behind assisted dying is going to be the fact that it'll save us an awful lot of money. Because bed blockers and all these other people who are clogging up the system will be removed through assisted dying. And of course, the other people who are going to benefit hugely are children whose parents' houses are not going to, the monetary value of their house is not going to be vaporized by care home fees. So it does, I hate to sound like a Marxist, but there is a very, very strong financial push behind this. It's economic, really.
Yeah.
And
But
of
you,
course, with our falling population, there are too many old people around, that's a fact, and there are not enough young people.
right, to take care of them.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just to balance out the thing. People are living too long and so on. However, the life expectancy is falling. So that is, I suppose, good news. And one,
Oh, good news.
yeah, let's hope so. Let's hope so.
It's that winter fuel allowance cut is really coming into
Yeah,
its
the winter fuel allowance is cut and so on. But life expectancy is falling. It's a major problem because, I mean, the whole pension system in every country in Europe is a Ponzi scheme,
own.
essentially. It's a pyramid scheme. And certain countries it's much worse than it is in Britain, but it's bad everywhere.
It's bad everywhere. Yeah. When you were talking about the wretches of Ypres, I was thinking, I mean, I loved Downton Abbey. I love period dramas, and I love Downton Abbey. And I was so fascinated by the opening credits when they show all the bells that go that are connecting the bedrooms of the masters to the servants, and how the systems and the servants waking up and getting everything sorted for the day, whilst the indigent gentry kind of like stretch and await their breakfast in bed. And I just I always marveled at that. Like, they took so many humans. There were so many humans available who had a purpose, and the purpose was to serve other humans. And we've done away with that now, which I would say, as someone who had we still be living in the old ways, I would definitely be a very unhappy servant, because
Mm.
that's the caste that I descend from. Like, literally, like, I didn't come from the landed gentry part, but and I probably wouldn't have made a very good servant at all. Um, so I'm glad that I've society modernized and I was given other opportunities. But I always have this, like, sort of unsettling feeling of, like, okay, so humankind has existed a certain way for how many millennia, and that way there was a small elite, and everyone else kind of worked in service of them and each other. And if we no longer have to do the work of in service of the elite and each other, what's the point of all these people?
Mm. Well, this is an interesting one. First of all, I mean, again, I hate to sound like a Marxist, but before the First World War, 1/5 of the British population was in service and a living in as well. So they were housed. So it actually provided housing for 1/5 of the population. I meet a lot of old people who say, oh, yes, my granny was in service at such and such a place. That's the phrase they use, in service. The other thing about all these people in service, okay, then the First World War came and ruined it all, I suppose. In the good old days, you had to be 2 to 1. For every member of the family, you had to have two servants. Now,
Hmm.
as it turned out, my mother's family were very, very rich. And when she was a little girl, there were 6 of them and there were 12 indoor staff. So
Oh,
they
wow.
had the right, what's ratio, 2 to 1. Um, and what these servants did, of course, was, well, they did everything. Of course, a lot of it's been replaced by machinery. What we have now is you might not be in service, you might not be working for Lady So and so, but you will be working for Kleinwort Benson or for Goldman Sachs or for
Right.
the National Health Service or for the London Transport Company or something like that. And you won't, this is the Marxist bit, you won't have a relationship with your
Right.
with your company or your boss. You will be alienated, as Marx says. You will be a cog in the machine, and perhaps you won't be particularly happy. Maybe your work will not be so physically hard, but you're still what the Japanese call a salary man, aren't you?
Yeah.
A drone. Well, not quite a drones are useless. You are this person who goes to work every day and comes back every evening. The crowds flowed down St. King William Street. I had not thought death had undone so many, wrote the blank clerk T.S. Eliot. In other words, working in the city or working in a factory. And so that's pretty grim, or can be quite grim as well. You don't actually have the relationship between you and the product of your work. So the workers' control of the means of production also means the workers actually have some input to what they produce. So you go into a shop and say, I like that cup. And the guy behind the counter says, yes, I made it. I really enjoyed making it, which
Yeah.
is rather important. You do still have a bit of that going on, farm shops and things like that. But generally speaking, our work may not be as rewarding
Yeah.
as it might be. Whereas
Yeah.
when you were in service, presumably there was, I think Downton Abbey maybe is a little bit misleading, but maybe there was a great sense of community below stairs. I don't
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
You had company, you had
It's more
friends.
it's more likely that there was than that there wasn't. I mean, I
Mm,
also think that people had an entirely different expectation,
mm,
um, and an entirely different kind of like ceiling. And um, the people that suffered under that were people who maybe, but I think there were a small number of people who always yearned for more, and those are always the characters in the novels, though, right? I mean,
yeah, yeah.
you know, but the majority of those people, I think, were quite satisfied
Yeah.
with their
There,
lot.
there, there were some, again, I hate to sound like a Marxist, but there were quite a few domestic servants who actually turned into revolutionaries in Russia, I seem to remember. The other thing was, in the world of domestic service, you had a pecking order.
Yeah,
And if you were a maid of all work, working for a lower middle class family, your life was miserable because you had to do everything and they treated you like a slave. Whereas if you were in a really grand house like Chatsworth, where there were 25 housemaids or 50 housemaids and so on, the work, it wasn't so bad, perhaps, because
mm,
you weren't worked half to death. But
and it
if
was a
you were
team.
working for a the type of family who only had one servant, life would have been pretty damn tough, I should think.
There was a great book that I read. It was in 2020, um, written by an Englishwoman, quite a well-known writer who I think is now died quite a few years ago, and it was about her grandmother who was in service, and
Mm,
I think she was just that. She was a single maid in a
yeah.
home in New York. Oh, it was such a great book. Let me just call it up here. It shouldn't take me too long to
Mm-hmm.
find it. Um, it was spellbinding, honestly, partly because I loved her very detailed descriptions of the actual work.
Oh,
So the actual back-breaking,
yeah.
um, labor and the daily routine that she stuck to just with absolute like military precision from,
Mm,
they had no vacuum. They didn't have vacuum
no,
cleaners. They didn't have
no.
washing machines. So, and they had coal fires. So the soot,
Mm,
so every week the carpets and the curtains, I never clean my curtains. It
yeah.
wouldn't occur to me to clean my curtains. And I
Yeah,
have machines and dry cleaners. I was like,
yeah,
that's not
yeah,
what I'm going to
yeah,
spend my time. And this woman took them down, washed them, the freezing cold water, the
yeah.
heating of the water, and then so you having your hands in cold water, and then having your face in a hot fire, and this, beating bits of furniture, and
Yeah,
just
the
this.
carpet beating. And of course, every day would start out by cleaning out the grates, when
Yes,
you would
right.
have to get up before the rest of the family, and then you'd have to lay the fires and so on. I mean, I've cleaned out a grate and laid a fire, but it was great fun to do. I was about 10 years old at the time. But doing that every day would be pretty grim, I must say.
Oh, the book was called Hidden Lives by Margaret Foster.
Margaret Foster. Okay.
Forster. Margaret Forster.
There's also, let's mention it while we're at it, Lucy Lethbridge, an old friend of mine, wrote a book called, I think, Servants, which was very well received, again, about maybe 10 years ago now, which was about, it was on the back of Downton Abbey, among other things, and it was about the phenomenon of indoor servants and how it died off. But, the indoor servants were much better off, I would say, than the farm labourers
And the factory workers, I bet.
and the factory workers, yes. And of course, the indoor servants, many of them would give themselves a sort of air,
Yes.
which the factory workers didn't have. Yeah. And the factory workers would have been jolly hard work. But I think the actual labouring in the fields, Swede hacking, it's described in Thomas Hardy's book, A Test of the D'Urbervilles, that must have been pretty damn awful. That would
Yeah.
have been awful. And there would have been even worse things. There would have been some really horrible, dangerous, nasty industrial jobs as well.
Yeah.
The worst, of course, is going up chimneys, I think, for little boys.
Yeah, or like rendering horse carcasses
Oh,
or something. Plenty of
yes.
terrible things. But the housekeeper. This was the most moving part of this book was the woman, the grandmother's intense pride in her job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this was like really interesting to me because, well, partly just the natural process of getting older. You look back at yourself when you were young, like a teenager and young woman, and you think, "Oh my God, I
Yeah.
was,
Yeah,
I
I've
was
been there.
like, it just the callowness, the
Yeah.
callowness of youth, like
Yeah.
just this sort of like kind of like a not even contempt. It's just like, oh, I know better. I'm cool, whatever. This sort of affected worldliness, and I just, I was when I was 19 and I never had done a day's work in my life, it just, and I think back to the my own ancestors and feel and my aunt Sissy's cards with the fivers in them and the
Mm.
prayers and everything, and I just think, oh my God. But the pride that this woman had because she was responsible for caring for this family that was socially superior to her.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can see why that would make people left wing. I don't begrudge people being left wing because of that dynamic, but I also think it doesn't do any service to the memory of all of the women who didn't
Mm.
feel the same way.
Mm.
I mean, this is where Marxism completely falls flat because the working classes have never bought into it.
Mm.
The people who,
Well, some of them did, it has to be
yeah,
said. In Russia, the more educated working class people,
right,
but it has to be said, somebody like Lenin was actually upper middle class,
right,
wasn't he? Stalin was a proper worker. Stalin's father
yeah,
was a shoemaker, but Lenin's father was a school inspector, I think.
yeah.
So,
They're
uh,
all it's all university.
yeah.
University is is the vector for that
Yeah,
particular disease.
yes, yes. One of the things is what you mentioned is, of course, that pride is very important. Now, one of the great things about Britain, and I'm sure this would have been the case in Northern Ireland before the Second World War and even after it, the idea of scrubbing your front doorstep
Yes,
and even buying one of these special stones that would whiten your front doorstep. And your front doorstep had to gleam. And for goodness sake, the lady at number, or the woman at number 22, she doesn't do that. The slut, I mean,
yes,
they're
yes.
taking pride in your thing. And, but the other thing that you also mentioned is so pride has gone, I think, um, or it's not with us in the same way. It's not with us in the good sense of pride. The other thing is deference is gone. Deference, I think, when you use the word deference, we're quite glad it's gone, maybe, but it's not so much a deference. It's stroke admiration for our betters.
Mm.
The whole concept of our betters has gone. But the other day I was preaching about, strangely, the Boy Scouts and so on came to church for their church parade, and I was preaching about. I mentioned him in the sermon, Lord Baden-Powell. Now, Lord Baden-Powell was a man who did immense good in the world. There's no doubt about that. He was obviously, I think, pretty eccentric and crazy, but he did immense good in the
I
world.
don't know
And
who
I
he is.
really admire Lord Baden-Powell. Nowadays, we very much have given up this idea of admiring great people.
Yeah, I don't know who that is.
Look, he's the founder of the scouting movement.
Oh, okay.
The guy who wore a silly hat, and you know about scouts.
Yes.
Boys dressed like fools, led by fools dressed like boys. And Lord Baden-Powell lived in Surrey, but I mean, he was a very eccentric man. He lived in Godalming, I think. He couldn't sleep indoors. He had to sleep out on the balcony
Oh, it's so funny. That's very
and things
British.
like that. You've heard of him, surely.
Not him. No, I've heard of the Scouts, but
Yeah,
I
Lord
never.
Baden-Powell. Well, now the amazing thing is, Lord Baden-Powell is obviously forgotten in our own country. In Italy, there are statues of Lord Baden-Powell
Really?
wherever you go. Yeah, it's quite amazing. It's quite
I never
amazing.
been a Scout in Italy in all my life.
Yeah, I came across one in Messina, and I was amazed. I thought, "What's this doing here?" Look, the Scout, or whatever they call them, and also in France, les Scouts are very much admired, and Lord Baden-Powell is very much admired. I mean, great youth leaders nowadays. Lord Baden-Powell was an influencer long before the so-called toxic influencers like Andrew Tate
Yes.
came along, which is really
Yes.
great. And it was all about outdoors and being healthy and this, that.
Right. Yeah. All that charming British. That's the very charming side of the Brits. The Well, you mentioned pride and you mentioned deference, and I mean, talk about two things that have been completely perverted and twisted and turned into cudgels to destroy our souls. I mean, the deference thing, and I've always there's always been part of me that was quite conservative, even as a child, and
Mm.
that I think also because I grew up with like sexual revolution parents. I was my parents used to call me the moral minority. It was in the 1980s because it was just me and them, and I was always disapproving of them. Um, but um, you know, yeah, and I think partly because my parents had an unusual lifestyle, but in terms of their ways of raising children, it was of me raising me. It was traditional enough, do the homework, do what we say. It wasn't overly, it wasn't like faddish new age parenting, thank God. Um, and it always just seemed to make sense to me. Children should listen to adults. I never really had much of a problem with that. Whereas now, adults listen to children apparently, and I do believe children should be listened to and paid close attention to. But the authority has to work the other way. The authority doesn't come from the child, obviously. And then, of course, pride. I mean, isn't it just ironic that one of the sins is literally the name of a festival, and it's one thing to have sort of enlightenment values that give people personal autonomy and give people basic like civil rights to live their lives and rights to privacy. It's one thing to have that, and another entirely then to let this concept become this like great gaping maw that is eating our corporations, eating our school curricula, literally trying to spirit our children away. I'm like, if you guys want to not be treated like demons, maybe you should stop acting like demons, because that's what you look like. You're dressed up with these horns on your head, for the love of God. People don't understand. People do not see symbols anymore. We've been like, all of our connection to these human um modes of communicating that aren't verbal have been ripped away from us. It was like, some of us still see the symbols, and I see the symbols, and I don't like it.
Well, I mean, this pride phenomenon, it used to be called gay pride, didn't it? And then they
Yes.
dropped the gay, now it's just pride. It started off, I believe, as a protest movement, didn't it?
Yes.
And Alistair McIntyre, in what is, I think, the most important book of our time, um, which is called After Virtue, talks about how dialogue has irremediably broken down between contesting groups. No, we have a dialogue of the deaf. Nobody's listening to anybody else
Right.
because everybody intends words in a different way.
Yeah.
And therefore, what we have instead of dialogue is we have protest. And protest has been raised up as almost to a sort of a sacramental level. Everybody is protesting. Now, you protest when it's the very last resort, I suppose. What you do is you try and reason with people, and then when that fails, you protest because reason has failed and a shared idea of reason has been jettisoned. All we're left with is protest, and of course, we protest has become terribly, terribly popular. Okay, we've got Pride, which is sort of a funny sort of protest because it's got nothing left to protest against. It seems to
Right.
be because it's largely won the argument. But then, of course, we have the Palestine protests and this and so on. And the Palestine protests are very strange when you think about it, because what are they protesting against? They're protesting against the Israeli government, but they're doing that in London
And Belfast and
and in
Dublin.
Belfast and so on and so forth. But the government of the United Kingdom does not have any say in what goes on in the former British mandated territory of Palestine. That we don't have any influence in that part of the world. Why are you protesting in London about this? Why not write to Mr. Netanyahu or go to Israel and protest there, or go to Gaza and protest there?
Yeah.
But no, it's really nothing to. I mean, this might be a little bit controversial. The three great protests you have nowadays are about. It's now Palestine, but it used to be Northern Ireland, and it also used to be Kashmir. Now, Kashmir and Northern Ireland have not gone away. Currently, Israel is at the top, but the other two are still there. These are all three territories which have been partitioned in this more or less during the breakup of the British Empire, essentially. And a lot of the people who are protesting, as you know, the most anti-Israel country in the world is the Republic of Ireland. The most pro-Israel country in the world is India.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, also deeply anti-Israel is Pakistan and so on. So it's this is where intersectionality really works,
Right.
because what they're really protesting about, a lot of the people in England, is Kashmir.
Hmm.
Without actually saying it, Palestine, Israel is a token for Kashmir, and the people in Ireland, what they're really protesting about, I think, is Northern Ireland. But and as you know, Protestant areas, they wave Israeli
Yeah.
flags, don't they?
Well,
And
that's I just someone on Twitter, on X was I was having a conversation on X about this. I don't recall. I know that there was a occasional protest, and I know that obviously the Troubles were a major media story. My dad wrote, I forget, I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say like 5 or 6 books, journalistic books about the Troubles, and a couple of
mm,
novels actually as well. I remember it quite well. Um, I don't. I mean, I'm pretty confident that it certainly wasn't every single weekend the Irish left was out on the streets, um, praising the IRA.
no,
It really wasn't. I mean, I know that there was, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there's a listener who can correct me in comments, but I know there's a lot of connections between the Dublin, the official IRA um, that kind of came back into the conflict in post 1969 through Dublin, but then they fell away. So, I mean, there was obviously connections to Dublin the whole time, but there was no mass mobilization of public opinion uh,
in the south, yeah,
in the South for the IRA, for their own country.
yeah,
And this is so bizarre to me. It's like your own country is partitioned. And I'm not a pro I'm not a 32 county person. I'm kind of indifferent to the matter because it's like a plague on both your houses as far as I'm concerned, north and south. But you actually had a country with a contested border and an occupying force, and you MRFers were not out on the streets.
no.
And this is what my husband talks about as well, because he grew up in a really hot zone in the middle of Northern Ireland, very, very hot, very active. He experienced a lot of terrible things, uh, troubles related. And it really makes him mad. It's like, and he said that the first time he noticed it was in the George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq, and of course all the middle class lefties and the Queen's professors were out on the streets of Belfast, being like, "Boo, George Bush, boo!" And he's like, "I never saw any of you fuckers protesting
Yeah.
anything back in the fucking 70s.
Yes.
Take a hike." Excuse my language, Father.
It,
Um, um, it's like this obsession. It's like the whatever the maybe I don't the natural desire to love and be proud and have intense emotional attachments to a place is no longer allowed, but we still have the drive, so we just pick a different place.
and these journalists who rather naughtily ask protesters which river, which
Mm.
sea, and they can't answer. I mean, there was recently somebody protesting against the St. Patrick's Day parade, I think somewhere in America, saying, "Oh, St. Patrick committed genocide."
He did?
And
Oh,
did you
snakes?
see that?
No.
Yeah, and you think, well, how, when, how, why? Could you give me times and dates and places? The use of the word genocide has become very, very debased. I
Yeah,
mean, what was done to the Armenians was a genocide. What was done to the Herero people was a genocide in what's now Namibia. And of course, what was done to the Jews was a genocide. But
right,
genocides are, thanks be to God, relatively few and far between. And the genocide actually means something very specific.
right.
And you see, language has lost its meaning because
Yeah,
again, the word rape has also been, rape means something quite specific. And it's been the term now covers most of sexual abuse.
yeah,
Sexual abuse is compared to rape is something different
yeah,
in quantity and quality.
yeah. No, I mean the word genocide is is replace the word war. And this
Yeah.
is what I said in my Substack about the horrible spitting incident in
Oh,
Dublin,
yes,
St. Patrick's
yes.
Day weekend. It's a war. It's not a genocide.
Yeah.
A war is not the same as a genocide,
Mhm.
and the movement is so is led by emotional reasoning
Yeah.
that it does not have the critical thinking skills to differentiate. And if you disagree with the war strategy, that to me would be a pretty rational position. I don't know enough even to disagree. I'm not sure how they fix this problem. I don't, I can't imagine having to fix this problem without, I don't know how you do that without killing people, to be perfectly frank,
Mm.
um, which is terrible. But if you disagree with it, with the war strategy, then just say the war strategy is wrong and be a peace activist on that level. But instead, you run around using the word genocide, which is an affront to Jews, having
Yes, of
just
course.
recently suffered a genocide, and every other victim, of genocides, many of whom have been forgotten in time. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's this all of our good and natural human instincts for justice, protection of loved ones, love of male and female, and love of children, that every single one of them has been hijacked and reprogrammed and used as a weapon against us.
Yeah. You say emotionally irrational or emotional rational something. The trouble is, rationality has been replaced by emotionalism.
Yeah.
Facts have been replaced by feelings, and that is a very bad problem. If you go back to, I know that Mr. West over at his podcast, sorry, his Substack, um, The Wrong Side of History, talks about the reductio ad Hitlerum. Every
Yes.
argument
Oh
gets
no.
back to
Not the
Ed
rest of
West.
history.
No, no,
Ed
Ed
West. Oh,
West, The
okay.
Wrong Side of History. He
Okay.
talks about the reduction to Hitler. Um, Hitler's most popular um, slogan was Die Juden sind unser Unglück. The Jews are our misfortune. Basically saying the Jews are the cause of all that's wrong with Germany. Get rid of the Jews and everything's fine. Um, and that this idea, die Juden sind unser Unglück, is an assertion that has absolutely zero evidence. I mean, the fact that your fridge is broken down, that was not caused by anybody who was Jewish, or the fact that you've got an ache in your foot was not caused by the Jews, and so on and so forth. So the idea of the demonization of a people usually has no, always has absolutely no basis in rationality. And of course, this has been going on in the Arab world for a very long time, and in the Islamic world. I remember being on holiday in Turkey, in a beach resort in Turkey, and there was a mosque. And this was 20 years ago, and they were giving out pamphlets outside the mosque, and I took one, and it contained the most awful caricatures of Jews, which looked like they'd been produced by Der Stürmer, the famous anti-Jewish magazine run by the Nazis. People with hook noses, pulling strings, and so on and so forth. And it was anti-Israeli, but anti-Jewish propaganda. This was 25 years ago, long before October the 7th or anything like that. And it's people in the Arab world, sadly, believe in conspiracy theories. It's raining. It must have been caused by the Jews.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah. All the Jews were out of the Twin Towers on 9/11. I've heard that.
Uh, yeah, I mean, it makes me very, very sad. Anybody could believe such rubbish.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, uh, we're drowning in rubbish. We're
Yeah.
drowning in rubbish ideas, and the most the most brutal kind of slap in the face of my former liberalism and my oh, the Enlightenment, oh amazing, um, was this reality that you know again, my father was specifically anti-clerical, like
Hmm. Hmm.
he had an appreciation for the wider culture, and the beauty and the art, and especially living in Italy, all the Italian stuff. He was like on board with that. He was not down with the Irish church, but he worshipped science, and he was the first person in his family to go to university. He was very erudite, very brilliant, and I think he kind of was like um, had he been born another time or place, he would have been like Lord Byron or something,
Hmm. Hmm.
and absolute devotee of English poetry and all this stuff. And so I was brought up in this world where it was just sort of the basis of everything. The assumption that we all operated on was that science had saved us from religion. Rationality had saved us from religion. The Enlightenment had saved us from superstition and mad beliefs that led to burning of witches and things like that. And guess what? That's actually not right at all, because had that actually been right, we would not be removing the genitals of young boys.
Yeah. Funny your father should worship science, because he was obviously a follower of Alexander Pope, who was hanging around in the reign of the early 18th century, who said, God said, let Newton be. No, nature and nature's laws lay steeped in night. God said, let Newton be, and all was light. In other words, I mean, and so God said, enough about me, here's Newton. And said the worship of science continued for many centuries. And of course, what put the kibosh on the worship of science, if there were still a few people worshipping it, was the COVID restrictions, when people said we must follow the science. And of course, what they didn't realize was that there's no such thing as the science. They're just interpretations of scientific data. And those interpretations, in that they're done by human beings, are always going to be subjective. And so the following of the science, in fact, turned out to be the following of a few people who had bees in their bonnets and led us to disaster.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the essence of us all being flawed,
Mm.
there's never been a time of human perfection. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No.
So what we used to do, in culture that I remember, in my kind of milieu, whatever. So we would point to the past and say, "Oh, weren't they dumb?" Or were they? I mean, not as bad as it is today. Like nowhere
Mm.
near as bad as it is today. We're
Oops.
not like berserkers, but just sort of a general sense of like, in a way, it was maybe healthy. We appreciated what we had, but we'd look back, look behind us and sort of see a backwardness. But actually, the same sort of with that, what they had, and that turns out you need, is the moral foundation of a hierarchy of virtue and vice. And I think I certainly got the impression that we didn't need that because we could figure it out by ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was like a sweet spot where that might have been true between 1968 and, say, I don't know, maybe 2020, but probably ended before that. They say 2016,
Mm.
where the the boomers were still brought up with those values of right and wrong, and even
Mm-hmm.
though they rejected them, it was infused in them. But those have now been completely diluted out, and we're all berserk. We're all
Mm.
completely crazy now, and we're deranged, and we're doing the most deranged things. So it turns out, actually, no, we cannot be relied
Yeah.
upon to invent a morality that is healthy. We
Mm.
need to just go back to the one we had.
Yeah. Um, we mentioned 1968 and we mentioned 1789, but the other person who is under whose shadow we all live is the guy that English commentators call Paul Potts.
Uh-huh.
Pol Pot, the guy who said, as from Monday, it's year zero, and we all start again, and who, well, I mean, he destroyed a whole nation, the killing fields of Cambodia. Everything it's year zero. Now, this concept of year zero, he wasn't the first person to have it, because if you look at Professor Dawkins, he says that he goes to this idea that the year zero, the beginning of the golden age, was Darwin, and before Darwin, nobody knew anything. It was all
Yeah.
they didn't know about evolution. So what did they know? Nothing. Now, of course, one of the things is before Darwin, a lot of people knew a lot of stuff. The other people who talk about the age of darkness and the age of light are Islamic brethren, because they say that before their prophet came along, everything was in darkness, and then the Enlightenment started with the prophet. Before him was the age of ignorance. Now, this is a very strange doctrine to hold, that before us lot came along, nobody knew nothing. It's simply not true. And the other thing is, what we need to do is, I think it was that famous guy who looked at the stars, astronomer, who said, I've only been able to do this because I've been standing on the shoulders of giants. Can't remember his name. What was his name?
I don't know.
He lived in Prague. He was a very, very famous astronomer. He's more or less the founder of modern astronomy. And
Copernicus?
no, not Copernicus. He had a funny Latinate name. He said, we've been standing on the shoulders of giants. And all of us, we don't need to go back to the beginning and reinvent the wheel.
Right.
We just need to stand on the shoulders of giants
Right.
and build on what's gone before us.
Right.
And so we go back to tradition.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's why you're seeing these young men coming in, because they sense that they have figured it out by themselves. They've managed to not be thoroughly indoctrinated somehow, and they're picking up on all of these things that we're talking about. And the only place to go is either the despair of the internet and porn and the entertainment. And we were going to we had planned on talking about that long before
Yeah.
now at this point, but um, and that is where you find it. Also, because to not stand on the shoulders of the giants and not appreciate the ancestors is to become monstrous, because you lose all your humility. If you think no one figured out until you and me, then you can do anything. Like, that power is awful. It's
Yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah. I don't think Newton thought of himself in that way, that he was the first person to have a single coherent thought and everybody before him was stupid. I
Right.
think people who came after Newton thought of him in that way, and presumably people who came after Darwin thought of him in that way. But
Yeah.
I think they probably were quite humble people. But this idea that the new age begins with us, you see this a lot in theology, which assumes that all theology done before 1968 was a waste of time. And only in 1968 did we finally wake up to what theology was really about. Well, that's nonsense, I'm afraid to say. There is no brave new world out there. It's we are this. There's only one world, and it's the world we've inherited. We must make the best of it. We can't. I mean, of course, the other person who had this great idea of we all start again is Karl Marx. We
Yes.
will find a new world, but you can't find a new world. There's only one world. Get on with it. Make the best of the
Yes.
world you've got. Yes.
Exactly.
But this thing about young people coming forward, particularly young men, and sort of going to church and so on and discovering God, they've been indoctrinated by woke theory. But you see, one of the great things is, this is a great thing, this will really cheer you up. Woke theory is such a load of rubbish that I don't think it indoctrinates very many people. It's a bit, for most of them, it's water off a duck's back. One of the things they used to say about Benito Mussolini is that fascist theory was a load of rubbish, and only a very foolish person could actually either understand it or go along with it. Although Benito Mussolini did actually have some style, he had great architecture
Yes.
and things like that. Hitler had what I'm sure, when you see the films made by Leni Riefenstahl, you can understand what people might have seen in Nazism. But the actual intellectual content was zilch.
Yeah.
Nowadays, woke's intellectual content is zilch. There is a sort of a bit of a nod to Marxism in woke, but real Marxists are usually quite bright and quite
Yeah.
coherent. Woke has got zero intellectual content. It's a cult, and the other thing is, woke is essentially ugly.
Hmm.
I don't think all the pretty girls have become woke by any means. Yeah, I don't just mean that in a sort of a sexist way. Sorry, am I being, But I don't think there's nothing beautiful in woke.
Nothing.
It's angry, it's ugly, it's in your face, and it's trying to make you
Humorless.
feel guilty. I don't want to be made to feel guilty. I can, by other people, I can make myself feel guilty in front of God. So I think woke is on a hiding to nothing. Though it may take some time and it may do a great deal of damage before it finally fizzles out. But don't forget, it's a bit like sharks. When you're wrecked in the middle of the ocean and you're hanging onto your life raft, the sharks start circling and they
Yeah.
come in, boom, and they grab somebody and they go off, and you think, oh well, thank God the shark is gone. But oh no, they're circling just for another time, and they'll be back. And the sharks have been circling since 1789, and maybe the sharks are sort of a standard in our life. Maybe it's whether it's big sharks or small sharks. There are periods where And I think, the current season of the Sharks started in 1968. And
Yeah.
1968 is almost 60 years ago. And it should be petering out about now. It usually lasts about a lifetime. All the people who made the 68 revolution in France are now very old or dead or something like
Mhm.
that. And so it is dying. They used to say, and I believe in Ireland, a lot of people believe this fervently, that the intellectual heartland of the planet is France. Do you
Mm.
hear that a lot in Ireland?
No, I've never heard that. I did hear, oh, I'm blanking on his name just the other day. Sharkey, David Sharkey,
David
David
Starkey. Yeah.
Starkey,
Yeah.
say
Professor
all
Starkey.
all bad ideas come from France. I was
Yeah.
like, actually, that sounds about right.
And also all good ideas come from France, I think you could possibly say. But I mean, somebody like Mary Kenny, who I revere, she is. She speaks French. She lived in France and so on, and she is a huge Francophile. And I think in amongst Irish intelligentsia, many of them were, particularly in the old days, were huge Francophiles.
Yeah.
Uh,
My mother's American, not Irish,
uh
but she's a huge was a huge Francophile. She
Yeah.
lived there in the 70s and
I mean,
French
and,
teacher.
and France is the country where les intellectuals, the intellectuals, to call somebody an intellectual is not an insult, whereas it is in Britain. I can't remember where I was going with this point, but the ideas come out of France, and it started in '68 in France. Although I think possibly maybe not '68, maybe we should be looking at. I think it was '78 was a disastrous year. Was the year of the Iranian
Yes.
Revolution,
Yes. No, I
and
think 68 was a good starting place.
yeah.
The 78 was terrible for it opened up a whole new front.
Yeah, and that front may well be closing. I mean, there are people in Iran who say, bring back the Shah.
Yeah.
Young people shouting, bring back the Shah, who can't remember the Shah because he was overthrown before they were born, but they want that. And
Yeah.
the Shah's son is a rather nice person, I think. The Shah's widow is a very nice person. She's in her 90s. I'm very, very, very hopeful that we'll see Faradiba return in triumph to Tehran. I'm
Wow.
not. I mean, I remember saying to somebody, my head of department, when I taught, and she said, why do you call it St. Petersburg? And I said, well, it will be again. To me, it'll always be St. Petersburg. She said, it'll never be called St. Petersburg again. About
You're
5 years, I was right.
charmingly optimistic father.
Yeah, yeah. About my mother always called it Petrograd
Okay. Yeah. There you go.
because it was known as Petrograd from 1914 to 1924. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I want to say because it's interesting to bring up France because I'm very disillusioned by France now. I spent a lot of time there as a kid because my mother in particular, was had so many connections there, and I was there in 2022, and it was actually quite a hilarious trip with my husband, my son, our dogs. One of my husband's sons was living there. Another came with us. It was like a family trip, and we literally had we ended it was so bad it ended up being really funny and enjoyable, but we didn't have a single good meal the entire time we were there. We had one good meal in a Sardinian restaurant, and every time I say this, I wrote a Substack about it, and I got lots of like people getting offended on behalf of France, but COVID in France was very unpleasant. I had to pass
yes,
through it just as the Green Pass was coming in. I was fleeing back to the United Kingdom in my car, and it's funny because I just all of these negative experiences I've had with France recently um, have just exponentially increased my love of Italy. And I've always loved Italy, but I live there, and I remember very distinctly experiencing its flaws. So I don't have an overly rosy picture of it. I understand how dysfunctional it is and corrupt, and it can be very fake. But I'm like, it's almost like I'm like a young girl falling in love again. Like I have this incredible desire just to go back to Italy and just not do anything else, just stay there for the rest of my life. Do you think I'm going mad?
no, I think you're completely correct. I spent 90 days in Italy last year, and I had an absolutely lovely time, I must say. And I found Italy, it's one of the things is compared to France, Italy always used to be a political joke.
Yeah,
Revolving door governments and that. Now, not so much. It's got a very
yeah,
capable prime minister, a prime minister who's universally, not quite universally respected. I mean, and whereas, of course, France is the place that's looking, and Germany as well, these are looking very, very politically non-stable.
Yeah.
So Italy is doing relatively well in that regard. The other thing about Italy is you will never find an Italian who hates Italy.
Yeah.
Italians don't do self-hatred, and
No,
as
they
soon as
don't.
they don't. Now, one of the things the Brits have got to learn is to stop doing self-hatred. But unfortunately, self-hatred in Britain goes right back to the time of Gladstone. I think it was Gilbert and Sullivan who said he supports every country except his own
Uh,
about Gladstone. It was the idea that Britain is the world's worst country and so on. So that goes back to the founder of the British left, who was Gladstone.
yeah.
So we need to get over that. And the Italians in Italy, the culture is very, very, very strong.
Yes.
And Italy, in many ways, is very regional, but also it's a very united culture. The lovely thing about Italy is that things like racism are unknown in Italy. Because if you are a person who turns up from Ethiopia, as long as you like their food, they will accept you. It's simple. And as long as, of course, you can speak their language, they will accept you.
Yeah.
But I
I know.
remember, hmm,
Go on.
I remember taking a group of people to Italy, and I said to them, "Look here, you've got to understand two things. The Italians despise you because one, you're ignorant, you can't speak Italian, and two, you eat disgusting food. Once you understand that, they'll take you to their hearts. Okay, apart when they forgive you that, they'll take you to their hearts because they're very kind, sweet, and generous people. But then
Yeah.
you've got to remember, you're ignorant, you can't speak their language, and you eat disgusting food.
Yeah.
And
And you
you've got
probably
to
don't
admit,
dress very well either.
yeah, that's
I know a lot of Italian lefties and very demoralized Italians who like own small businesses and stuff like that, who would disagree with you on the racism front, and also they would be quite critical of Italy in the sense of its political class and the corruption. But I do agree with you that I mean I watched the Netflix series Il Gatto Pardo, the
I
leopard.
haven't watched it.
It's very good. I mean, I don't know, maybe I think maybe my criticism is dialed down because it's in Italian and I'm just charmed by everything. So it might not be great, but I enjoyed it very much. And it really was striking. I was like, I mean, what 1860 was it that Italy was
Hmm.
unified? What
Hmm.
a tremendous success story. The French had to massacre thousands of people to get to get that sort of nationhood. Um, there's something in intent. I mean, there's something incredibly humane about Italians, and part of it is that they just expect the flaws, and they don't they don't have any Puritanism in them whatsoever.
Thank God.
Um, thank God. Um, it's just so charming, and
Yeah.
you feel like in a warm embrace from it.
Did you ever see the film, by the way, of Il Gatto Pardo, the
No.
leopard? Well, I believe, that is a masterpiece. It's Visconti's masterpiece. There was an article written by Nick Farrell in The Spectator, and I commented on it in my Substack about it. It contains the world's most beautiful woman, Claudia Cardinale, and the world's most beautiful man, Alain Delon. And then there was a guy who wasn't a bad actor, Burt Lancaster. So it was pretty good. It was, and people, okay, they made this Netflix series, which I haven't seen, but it's the greatest film of all time. So why weren't they content with that? What I would say this is that in Italy, you've got, this is something I'm constantly going on in my Substack about, you've got actually a failed state.
Hmm.
But you've got lots of consolations. And what you have in Italy, I mean, when sociologists write about two countries in particular which they admire, one is Japan and one is Italy. Italy has very strong local systems, family systems, regional systems. Italy is not a fragmented, atomized society. It's very molecular. And I think that keeps things going. And there are lots of shared loyalties and lots of ties that bind in Italy. But government in Italy is just a pain
Yeah.
in the neck.
Yeah.
At least until fairly recently, it just shows very little sign of working. The worst governments they ever had were in the just before the First World War. They fought the First World War thinking this would solve all their problems. It didn't. Then they had even worse governments. Then they had Mussolini,
Mhm.
and then, of course, they had the Second World War, thinking that would solve all their problems. It didn't. And then after the war, they had this constant standoff between Christian democracy and the communists.
Yeah.
So Italy has been they've been very, very, very lucky. A lot of people were killed in the First World War, sadly, and quite a few in the Second World War. But the destruction done to Italy was nothing like the destruction done to Germany.
True. Yeah.
I mean, they really did escape very lightly, particularly in the Second World War.
Yeah. Considering
I
they
mean, their
active
cities were not bombed flat;
right.
they
Yeah.
hardly got bombed at all.
Yeah. The we were just saying that reminded me of someone in recent years, and I think it was probably during COVID when I was concerned that we were about to be taken over by like a dystopian corporate big pharma state,
Hmm.
and I was very alarmed. And I heard someone say, and some like kind of one of these people like buy gold, like a one of these, what do you call them? Not survivalists, but the uh,
Somebody from
preppers,
North
like
Dakota,
prepper
yeah,
type, saying if things really go south, you're better off in a place with a very weak government. And I'm like, that makes complete sense. And
yeah,
like I think that's why Italy has actually endured because of the fragmentation. Is actually there's a lot of downside. There is a benefit to it.
mm,
And I think if you have to choose, like England right now, not well, UK certainly, because if you add in Scotland and Wales and bloody Northern Ireland, like it's a strong state with a failed culture, whereas Italy is a failed state with a strong culture, and I'd
yeah,
much rather
yeah,
have that because the state is annoying anyway.
yeah,
Like the state's always it's going to be like the dentist. No one's ever going
yeah,
to like it.
right,
Um,
mm,
and like I just have so many hilarious stories of Italians being Italian in the most charming and incongruous ways. Like my husband was saying the other day, a couple of years ago, he was making his way back from the village where my mother lives to the airport, and he had to get a train and switch another train. Of course, the train breaks down, and they're stuck, and it's the summer, a hot summer day, and he's like really sweating bullets because he has to get to Fiumicino to catch a flight.
oh,
Anyway, and the Italians just give up, and they
yeah,
literally, I mean, and this almost sounds like a racist joke. They busted, like they suddenly out of nowhere, he said, appeared picnics, bottles of wine, salami. The bottles of wine were opened. People started smoking in the train. And I mean, it's just so like you find it frustrating, and then you're like, I mean, those are all the things that I love the most. So
yeah.
I'm like, I'm happy there. If the thing has to collapse around me, at least, and everyone's chatting with each other, and everyone's laughing, and it's just like it is the most irrepressible place that I've ever been, and I
And yet
just
there's a lot of sadness in Sicily in particular, which is
yeah.
my speciality. I remember a similar story to yours. I was waiting for a bus to go to Corleone, which, of course, as you know, is the mafia heartland of Sicily. I thought I'd go to Corleone just to see what it was like. And I turned up and nobody knew where the bus went from and so on. Eventually, I met a girl who was waiting for the same bus. And the guy came along in the bus and said, and we said, "Are you the bus to Corleone?" He said, "Yes, but I've run out of petrol, so I'm not going." And I said and then he drove off. And I turned to this young lady and I said, "Oh, is this normal? That the bus just doesn't turn up?" And she said, "Siamo in Sicilia. We're in Sicily." In other words, in her voice, I could hear the weariness of centuries of misgovernment. She was saying what our ancestors had said back in 1550. This is Sicily. Things don't change
Yeah.
and nothing works. And, we just have to put up with it. And by God, we've got used to it. And so we don't complain. So
Yes.
Sicily is beautiful, beautiful, and yet there's also a tragic undercurrent. That's
Yeah.
not the same in, let's say, places like Lombardy, which are completely different in atmosphere.
Yes.
Everything works in Lombardy. And even in Friuli, Venezia, Giulia, even more so. Those places are like Germany. But
Yeah.
Sicily sometimes is a bit like North Africa.
Rome. I mean, Rome is like that too. Like we tried to get the bus in, and there was two different schedules with two different times. It was unclear which one was valid, and then the bus turned up at neither of those times. So we
Yeah.
just stood up. We just stood there, like I gave myself a 30-minute window on each side because I knew we didn't know the bus could be any time. And I had an American friend with me, and he was like, "How is this even possible?" And I'm
Yes.
like,
How is this even possible?
I don't know, but you just know, don't go there at the appointed time because it's not going to be the right
Yeah.
time. Go early, you're going to miss the bus.
An Italian friend of mine said Italy is two countries. The north is Austria, the south is Africa. And
Yeah,
of course, the only debate is where the frontier between the two is. But there
right.
is definitely a frontier between the two. I mean, I think Rome is definitely not Austria, but if you go to somewhere like Viterbo, which is only 50 miles north of Rome, it is Austria already.
Uh,
So it is. It is. I mean, some of those places in the north of Italy are absolutely idyllic,
yeah.
but some of the places in the south of Italy, although they're chaotic and so on, are deeply charming, I must say.
Mm.
I'm going to have to go because I've got
Yes.
somebody coming along any moment now. But it's
And
been lovely talking to you,
it's
and we
been
haven't
lovely
talked
to.
about any of the things we were going to talk about.
I know we got sidetracked, but in the most delightful way.
Oh,
I
good,
hope the
good, good.
listeners
Well, I hope
agree.
so. Okay,
Um, well, we'll do it again.
good.
I normally can see the minute clock, and I can't. I've been searching for it the whole time, so I think we've been going for about an hour 20. I could be a little bit
Oh, I
off.
think so. Yes, at least because it's 15:40 now, and I think we
Yes,
started about 15:20 or 15:20
yes, that's right.
22.
Yes.
Okay.
So, Father Alexander, your book, your recent book is called
The good
Good
here it
Boys
is,
of
the
Sicily.
the Good Boys of Sicily, and it's available in Kindle and in a paperback which you can buy off Amazon. The details are on my Substack as well, and I feel a bit of sort of bad sort of promoting it, but nobody else is going to promote it, so I might as well.
Exactly.
Okay,
More power to you, and
and
we'll
it's
do
all
this
about the mafia, and it's really fascinating. You'll love it.
great. I will get myself a copy.
Ah,
I need to read
we've
more
got to start with the
novels.
first one. You've got to start with the first one because it's a
True.
series of six. The first one is called The Chemist of Catania,
Okay,
which is
I
about a
might
bomb
hear that now.
maker.
All right,
Okay,
that now.
all the best.
Father, it was lovely. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure. All the best, Jenny. We'll speak again. Bye.
Bye.